Picture a normal airport for a moment. Miles of concrete. Now, imagine taking all of that, crushing it down into a single steel structure, and pushing it out into the middle of the ocean. That is what an aircraft carrier really is. Not just a warship with a flat roof, not just a runway at sea. It is a floating airport, a power plant, a weapons depot, a hospital, a factory, and a small city packed into one armored hull. On the top deck, jet engines scream in the open air. Deep below, people sleep in narrow bunks. Bombs move through armored shafts. Pumps push water through hidden pipes, and nuclear reactors keep the entire city alive. Today, we are going inside that machine. We will start on the most dangerous runway in the world, then move down through the hangars, the weapons magazines, the command centers, the living spaces, the damage control systems, and finally, the nuclear heart buried deep inside the ship. The first thing you notice on the flight deck is the violence of the environment. A land-based airport gives a fighter jet thousands of feet to accelerate. An aircraft carrier gives it only a short strip of steel that is moving, vibrating, and rolling with the sea. The deck may look flat from a distance, but it is not a peaceful runway. It is a working, industrial battlefield. A modern fighter is heavy. Fully fueled and loaded, it can weigh tens of thousands of pounds. Under normal conditions, it would need a long stretch of concrete to build enough speed for lift. On a carrier, engineers solve that problem with a catapult. Hidden below the deck are massive systems designed to store and release energy almost instantly. On older carriers, that energy comes from high-pressure steam. On newer ships, electromagnetic launch systems perform the same job with powerful linear motors. Either way, the goal is brutal and simple. Grab the aircraft and throw it into the sky before the deck runs out. The aircraft is locked to a shuttle in the deck. The pilot pushes the engines to full power. For a few seconds, the jet is straining forward, held back by the launch gear. Then the hold releases. The catapult fires. In just a couple of seconds, a machine weighing many tons is slammed from a standstill to flying speed. The pilot is forced back into the seat. The nose of the aircraft rises. The end of the deck rushes underneath. And then, almost impossibly, the jet leaves the ship and becomes airborne. If the system is too weak, the aircraft falls into the sea. If the system is too violent, it can damage the aircraft. Every launch is a controlled collision between engineering and physics. Landing is even more extreme. A fighter returning to the carrier does not gently touch down the way a passenger aircraft does at a normal airport. It comes in hard, fast, and deliberately aggressive. The pilot aims for a tiny section of deck while the entire ship moves beneath him. Across the landing area are thick steel arresting wires. The aircraft drops a tail hook from its rear fuselage. If the hook catches one of those wires, the cable is pulled violently backward into machinery below the deck. Hydraulic systems absorb the energy and stop the aircraft in a distance that feels absurdly short. But if the hook misses, the pilot cannot hesitate. He already has the engines at full power. The aircraft touches the deck, fails to catch the wire, and immediately launches back into the air for another attempt. This is why carrier pilots land at full throttle. It looks strange until you understand the danger. On an aircraft carrier, every landing is also a possible takeoff. For the crew working on the flight deck, the danger never stops. Jet blasts can throw a person across the deck. Propellers and intakes can kill instantly. Arresting wires can snap under tension and whip across the deck like steel blades. Fuel, weapons, heat, wind, salt spray, and constant noise fill the space. Nobody can rely on spoken commands here. The engines are too loud. Instead, the deck is organized by color. Yellow shirts direct aircraft. Green shirts handle catapults and arresting gear. Purple shirts work with fuel. Red shirts handle weapons and crash response. Brown shirts are assigned to specific aircraft. White shirts watch safety and quality control. From above, it can look chaotic. but it is not chaos. It is choreography performed inside a storm of exhaust, heat, and steel. But the flight deck is only the surface. A carrier cannot keep every aircraft exposed to sun, salt, wind, and waves. Most of the air wing spends much of its life below the deck, inside the hangar bay. To get there, aircraft move on giant elevators mounted along the edges of the ship. These are not normal elevators. They are open steel platforms large enough to carry fighter jets, equipment, and crews. When one lowers from the flight deck, it feels like a piece of the ship is peeling away and sinking down along the side of the hull. The hangar bay is the carrier's hidden workshop. If the flight deck is the stage, the hangar is backstage. Here, aircraft are inspected, repaired, armed, cleaned, refueled, and prepared for the next launch. Panels are opened, engines are checked, hydraulic lines are inspected, electronics are tested, tires, weapons racks, sensors, and landing gear are serviced in the tight space between machines. The first surprise is the lack of room. From the outside, an aircraft carrier looks enormous.
But inside, space is always running out. Aircraft are parked with wings folded to save every possible foot. Tool carts, ladders, spare parts, hoses, cables, and mechanics all compete for the same narrow lanes. A careless movement can dent an aircraft, damage equipment, or block an entire workflow. The hangar is not a garage. It is a factory trapped inside a ship, and it is one of the most dangerous factories at sea. A carrier hangar contains aircraft fuel, hydraulic fluid, oxygen systems, electrical equipment, hot surfaces, and sometimes armed aircraft. A fire in this space can spread with terrifying speed. The ship cannot simply evacuate like a land facility. It is surrounded by ocean, and the fire is inside the body of the vessel. So the hangar is built to be cut apart. Massive fire doors can drop down and divide the bay into sealed sections. Foam systems can flood a burning zone, smothering flames before they reach more aircraft. Ventilation can be isolated, so smoke does not spread through the ship. The goal is not always to save every machine. Sometimes the goal is to sacrifice one section so the rest of the carrier survives. But a carrier's aircraft are only aircraft until they receive their weapons. The bombs, missiles, ammunition, and other ordnance are not stored casually near the flight deck. They are kept deep inside the hull, in protected magazines located far below the visible parts of the ship. To reach them, we move downward again. The weapons magazines are among the most carefully controlled spaces on the carrier. Here, the ship stores the destructive power that makes the air wing more than a collection of aircraft. Missiles, bombs, gun ammunition, and specialized weapons are kept in reinforced compartments away from heat, sparks, casual traffic, and the open deck. Their location is deliberate. Deep in the hull, the magazines are shielded by layers of steel, compartments, and seawater. If the ship is hit, the most dangerous cargo must be protected from fire and shock as long as possible. Weapons do not move through ordinary passageways. They travel through dedicated routes and armored elevators. A bomb can rise from a magazine to a weapons assembly area, then to the hangar or flight deck without mixing with normal crew movement. The rules here are unforgiving. A mistake in a kitchen burns food. A mistake in a machine shop breaks equipment. A mistake in a weapons magazine can kill the ship. Temperature and humidity are monitored. Fire detection is constant. Access is controlled. If a magazine is threatened by fire, the crew may have to make one of the harshest decisions on the vessel: flood the compartment with seawater. That means deliberately destroying the weapons inside to prevent a larger explosion. In simple terms, the ship is designed to drown part of itself in order to stay alive. To coordinate the flight deck, the hangars, the weapons, the crew, and the ships around it, the carrier needs a brain. Part of that brain rises above the flight deck in the structure called the island. It is the only major tower on an otherwise flat deck, pushed to the side so aircraft can launch and recover with as little obstruction as possible.
The island is the carrier's visible command point. From the bridge, officers control the movement of the ship itself: course, speed, navigation, and maneuvering. Nearby, flight control watches the deck and manages the rhythm of launches and recoveries. Above and around them, radars, antennas, cameras, and communication systems scan the air and sea. The island has to see everything without getting in the way of anything. That is why it is offset to the starboard side. The carrier's roof belongs primarily to the aircraft, but the real nerve center is not up there in the tower. It is buried inside the hull. The Combat Information Center is a very different world from the flight deck. There is no open sky, no salt spray, no roaring engines. The room is dark, cold, and filled with the glow of screens. Air conditioning hums constantly to keep electronics alive. Operators sit at consoles, watching radar tracks, aircraft positions, ship movements, threat zones, and incoming data from other vessels and aircraft. The carrier almost never fights alone.
It operates as the center of a carrier strike group. Destroyers, cruisers, submarines, aircraft, satellites, and early warning planes all feed information into the larger network. The Combat Information Center turns that flood of data into a picture people can act on. On the flight deck, the carrier is noise and motion. In the Combat Information Center, it becomes calculation. But none of this works without the thousands of people living inside the ship. This is where the carrier stops feeling like a weapon and starts feeling like a city squeezed into steel. The living spaces are not luxurious. They are efficient. Sailors sleep in stacked bunks, often with very little room between the mattress and the bunk above. Personal space may be no more than a small locker and the area around a rack. Passageways are narrow. Pipes and cables run overhead. Ventilation hums constantly. The ship vibrates in a way people eventually stop noticing. For many crew members, life on board shrinks down to a few repeated locations: a bunk, a workstation, a mess deck, a passageway, and maybe a small corner to sit for a few minutes when the shift ends. The carrier is huge, but it does not feel huge when you live inside it. Thousands of people share the same air, the same corridors, the same lines for food, the same announcements over the ship's speakers. Some people work while others sleep. Some eat breakfast while others are ending a night shift. The ship never really has a normal day and night. Its clock is built around operations. Food becomes more important than it sounds. The galleys are industrial kitchens designed to feed a small town. Massive kettles, ovens, freezers, refrigerators, storage rooms, and dishwashing stations run around the clock. Meals are served in waves because 5,000 people cannot all sit down at once. Fresh food has to be stored, moved, cooked, served, cleaned up, and replaced again and again. A carrier can launch aircraft only if its people keep functioning. And people keep functioning because somewhere below the flight deck, cooks are turning tons of supplies into thousands of meals. The ship also has to care for the bodies of the crew. A carrier includes a medical department with treatment rooms, dental spaces, pharmacy storage, and operating capability for emergencies. This matters because the ship may be far from land, and the work on board is dangerous. A person can be burned by steam, injured by machinery, thrown by a sudden movement of the ship, hurt on the flight deck, or affected by smoke during a fire. On land, you call an ambulance. At sea, the ship must become the ambulance, the clinic, and sometimes the hospital. But a city at sea is always under threat from the two things that surround it and fill it: water and fire. That is why damage control is not a side system on an aircraft carrier. It is part of the ship's basic design. Below the visible spaces, the hull is divided into many watertight compartments. Bulkheads, doors, hatches, pipes, valves, and pumps form a hidden architecture of survival. If the hull is damaged, the goal is to stop water from spreading. Heavy watertight doors seal off compartments. Pumps remove flooding.
If the ship begins to list, the crew can counterflood other compartments to balance the mass. This sounds strange until you realize the alternative. Sometimes, the only way to save a ship from capsizing is to intentionally add water in exactly the right place. Fire is just as dangerous as flooding, maybe more dangerous. A ship is a closed space full of fuel, wiring, machinery, paint, insulation, and people. Smoke can move through ventilation faster than flames move through a corridor, so ventilation zones can be isolated. Fans can be redirected. Fire teams move through passageways with hoses, breathing gear, thermal cameras, and repair kits. On a carrier, every sailor is trained to fight for the ship because there is nowhere else to go. And now we reach the source of the carrier's autonomy, the nuclear propulsion plant. Deep in the lowest protected sections of the hull, behind shielding and controlled access, nuclear reactors provide the heat that makes the entire machine possible. The basic idea is simple. Inside the reactor, controlled nuclear fission produces intense heat. That heat warms water in a closed primary loop kept under high pressure. The radioactive water in that loop does not leave the protected reactor system. Instead, it transfers its heat through steam generators to a separate loop of clean water. That clean water becomes high-pressure steam. Steam is the carrier's hidden lifeblood. It can drive turbines. Those turbines can turn massive shafts connected to the propellers. They can also spin electrical generators that power radars, pumps, lights, elevators, computers, ventilation, kitchens, and thousands of other systems. The reactors also support the ship's ability to produce fresh water. Desalination systems turn seawater into usable water for drinking, cooking, washing, and technical needs. Without fresh water, the city cannot function. Without electricity, the sensors die, the pumps stop, the kitchens shut down, and the carrier becomes a powerless steel island. The propulsion plant does not just move the ship, it sustains the world inside it. At the stern, that energy finally becomes motion. Shafts running through the lower hull rotate huge propellers outside the ship. Those propellers bite into the ocean and push nearly 100,000 tons of steel forward. A carrier cannot turn or stop like a small boat. Its mass gives it the patience and danger of a moving building. From the flight deck, you see aircraft. From below, you understand that the aircraft are only the most visible part of a much larger organism. Now the whole structure comes together. Heat from the reactors becomes steam. Steam becomes electricity, propulsion, fresh water, and launch power. Electricity feeds the Combat Information Center, the pumps, the elevators, the lights, the radars, the ventilation, and the kitchens. Weapons move upward through protected shafts. Aircraft descend into hangars and rise back to the deck. Sailors sleep, eat, repair, monitor, clean, cook, navigate, and stand watch while the ship moves through open ocean. An aircraft carrier is not impressive only because it is large. It is impressive because so many dangerous systems are forced to coexist inside one hull: aircraft, fuel, weapons, nuclear power, seawater, fire, machinery, and thousands of people. From the outside, it looks like a flat runway on the ocean. Inside, it is a layered steel city built around one rule: everything must keep working even when something goes wrong. That is the real engineering achievement of the aircraft carrier. Not the size, not the weapons, not even the aircraft on the deck. The miracle is that this hidden world can function as one machine, day after day, thousands of miles from land, with no room for chaos and almost no room for error.